May 5, 1945. Hacksaw Ridge, Okinawa. The order had come down, retreat. The Americans had taken heavy casualties at the top of the Maeda Escarpment, a 400-foot cliff the soldiers called Hacksaw Ridge. Japanese artillery, mortars, and machine guns had torn through them. The commander made the only rational decision available. Pull back. Get off the ridge. Regroup below. The men retreated. They climbed back down the cargo nets that hung from the cliff face. One by one they descended, leaving behind the dead and the wounded who couldn't move on their own. All of them retreated. Except one. Private First Class Desmond Doss stayed on the ridge. He was the only medic left on top. He was unarmed. He had never carried a weapon in his life and he was not going to start now. Around him, more than 70 men lay wounded in the dirt and the smoke, unable to get themselves off the cliff. He looked at the men around him. He started praying. "Lord," he said, "please help me get one more." And he picked up the first man. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. He grew up in a small house with his parents and 2 siblings. His father was a carpenter. His mother worked in a shoe factory. They were a Seventh-day Adventist family, a faith that shaped everything about how Desmond saw the world, including what he believed about the commandment that said "Thou shalt not kill." On the wall of the family home hung a picture of the 10 Commandments. In the illustration beside the 6th commandment, there was an image of Cain standing over the body of Abel, the first murder in the Bible. Desmond stared at that picture as a child and understood something about himself. He could not take a life. He would not take a life. This was not a calculation. It was not fear or weakness or avoidance. It was a conviction as deep as anything he had ever felt, the kind of belief that doesn't bend under pressure because it has never needed to. He was, by every account, the most genuinely gentle person most people who knew him had ever met. Patient. Quiet. Direct. A man who meant exactly what he said and never said anything he didn't mean. When his brother took over the wheel of a car during a fight and nearly ran it off a road, young Desmond grabbed him and stopped it. The memory of that moment, of how close he had come to genuinely hurting someone he loved, stayed with him for the rest of his life. He decided that day that his hands were for saving people. Not for anything else. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Desmond Doss was 22 years old, working at the Newport News Naval Shipyard in Virginia. His job in a war industry would have guaranteed him a draft exemption. He could have stayed home legally, without shame, without question. He didn't want to stay home. He wanted to serve his country. He believed in what America was fighting for: freedom, the lives of other men, the right to live without being destroyed by empires that would not stop unless someone stopped them. The problem was that serving his country, for Desmond Doss, could not include killing anyone. He enlisted as a conscientious objector. He didn't like that term, he called himself a conscientious cooperator. He wanted to serve. He wanted to fight alongside the other men. He just wasn't going to carry a weapon. He requested assignment as a combat medic. The Army said yes. And then the Army spent the next 2 years trying to get rid of him. Basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. From the first day, Desmond Doss was different. He would not handle a rifle. He would not train with weapons. And every Saturday, the Sabbath in the Seventh-day Adventist faith, he went to church while his fellow soldiers trained. The men in his barracks did not understand him. Some thought he was faking. Some thought he was a coward hiding behind religion to avoid the dangerous parts of war. Some thought he simply wasn't right in the head. They threw boots at him while he knelt to pray at night. They taunted him. They pressured him. Some of them physically beat him. His commanding officer, Captain Jack Glover, tried to have him transferred. He tried multiple times, in multiple ways. He told Doss directly that he didn't want a man like him in his unit, that a medic who couldn't fight was a liability on the battlefield. Doss responded with something that Glover would remember for the rest of his life. "Don't ever doubt my courage," Doss told him. "Because I will be right by your side, saving life while you take life." Glover tried to have him discharged on grounds of mental instability. Doss refused to accept the discharge. He was not mentally unstable. He was a man with a Bible and a belief that had never wavered once. At one point, his case went to a court-martial. He stood before the tribunal and would not plead guilty to anything. His father arrived at the last moment with a letter from a general establishing that Doss's pacifism was protected by the United States Constitution. The charges were dropped. Desmond Doss stayed in the army. His fellow soldiers, one by one, began to change their minds about him. Not because he changed. Because they started to see what he actually was. He never missed a training session that wasn't the Sabbath. He was in better physical condition than most of the men who had mocked him. He learned his medical skills with the same absolute seriousness he brought to everything else. And the Maeda Escarpment. 400 feet of jagged volcanic rock rising out of the Japanese countryside. The top 35 feet was an overhang, you couldn't climb it without cargo nets. The Japanese had been fortifying this position for years. Tunnels, bunkers. Machine gun nests positioned to cover every approach. Artillery zeroed in on the cargo nets and the cliff face. The Americans called it Hacksaw Ridge. On April 29, 1945, the 307th Infantry Regiment moved into the line. Doss's company, B Company, climbed the cargo nets on May 2 and reached the top. The fighting at the top was unlike anything most of them had ever experienced. Japanese machine gun fire was so intense that one American soldier was decapitated. Men fell where they stood. The wounded couldn't be evacuated fast enough. Desmond Doss moved through all of it. No rifle. No pistol. A medical kit in his hands and the certainty that God had put him here for exactly this purpose. He treated men under fire. He dragged wounded soldiers from exposed positions. He was seen running through enemy fire multiple times, not because he didn't understand what was happening around him, but because there was a man on the ground 20 yards ahead of him who was going to die if Doss didn't reach him. On May 2, he crawled 200 yards forward of the American lines to reach a single wounded soldier. 200 yards into enemy territory. Unarmed. 2 days later, he treated 4 men who had been cut down while assaulting a Japanese cave. He advanced through grenades to within 8 yards of the cave entrance, 8 yards, and dressed their wounds before making 4 separate trips to carry them to safety. 4 trips. Into enemy fire. For 4 men who would have died without him. And then came May 5. May 5, 1945. The Japanese counterattack hit hard. The Americans were pushed back. The commander ordered the retreat. 155 men had gone up the escarpment. Only 55 came down on their own. The rest were still up there. Desmond Doss looked at the men around him, wounded, unable to move, scattered across a piece of ground being swept by enemy fire, and made a decision that requires no explanation. He was not going to leave them. He started with the man closest to him. Picked him up. Carried him to the edge of the cliff. But carrying a man down a 400-foot cliff face wasn't something one person could do alone. You needed a rope. You needed a knot that would hold a man's weight and not drop him. Doss later said that the knot came to him in a moment of prayer. "Lord, help me," he said. Then I thought of a knot that I had never seen or heard of before in my life. A double bowline. 2 loops that created a harness. He tied it around the first man, lowered him over the edge, and let him down hand by hand to the soldiers waiting below. Then he ran back across the ridge. "Lord, please help me get one more." He found another man. Carried him. Lowered him. "Lord, please help me get one more. Again. 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 For 5 hours, alone, on top of a ridge being contested by an enemy that wanted him dead, Desmond Doss carried the wounded to the cliff's edge and lowered them down on a rope. He wanted to save 50 men. When it was over, the count was 75. He later said, with complete sincerity, without any performance, "I don't want to ever say I took care of 75. All I want to say is I was just thankful that the Lord was able to use me, and forget the number." He was still on the ridge 2 weeks later. May 21, 1945. A night attack. Japanese soldiers moving through the darkness. An enemy grenade landed near Doss and 3 other soldiers. He kicked at it. Got it away. The blast went off, not directly at him, but close enough. Shrapnel tore into his legs. 17 pieces. He was lying wounded in the dirt in the middle of a battle. He treated his own wounds as best he could. Then he waited. He waited for 5 hours while the fighting continued around him, refusing to call for another medic to come to him. When stretcher-bearers finally reached him, he saw a more critically wounded soldier nearby. He crawled off the stretcher, told the bearers to take that man first, and waited again. While he was being carried back down the ridge, a tank attack forced his evacuation team to take cover. In the confusion, Doss was left on the ground again. A sniper found him. A rifle bullet hit his arm and shattered it. He fashioned a splint from a rifle stock. He crawled 300 yards through enemy fire to reach the aid station. He was evacuated from Okinawa on May 21. The war, for Desmond Doss, was over. He went home and spent the next 6 years in hospitals, first for his wounds, then for tuberculosis he had contracted in the Philippines. The disease destroyed one of his lungs. Doctors removed it, along with 5 of his ribs. He came out of all of it with 1 lung and the quiet certainty that he had done exactly what he had been put on this earth to do. October 12, 1945. The White House. President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around the neck of Corporal Desmond Thomas Doss. Truman shook his hand and held it. "I'm proud of you," Truman told him. "You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." Doss was the first conscientious objector in American history to receive the Medal of Honor. He was the only soldier in the Second World War to earn it while refusing to carry a weapon. Captain Jack Glover, the officer who had tried to have Doss transferred, who had tried to have him discharged, who had told him he had no place in a fighting unit, was asked about Doss after the war. He said something that is worth reading slowly. "Even though I said those things to him in regard to carrying a rifle, then he would never be by my damn side at all unless he had a rifle. But then, in the long run, finding out that he was one of the bravest persons alive. And then to have him end up saving my life, was the irony of the whole thing." Glover was one of the 75 men Doss lowered off Hacksaw Ridge. Desmond Doss went home to Virginia. He farmed. He went to church every Saturday. He raised his son, Desmond Jr., who grew up and became an Army medic himself, and then a firefighter and paramedic. He did not talk much about what he had done. Not because he was ashamed of it. Because, to Desmond Doss, there was nothing extraordinary about it. He had done what his faith required. He had done what the men around him needed. The numbers, 75 men, were God's numbers, not his. In 1959, he appeared on the television program This Is Your Life, where he was surprised by guests who had come from across the country to speak about what he had meant to them. The host leaned over to Doss's son and asked if they had surprised his father. The boy grinned and said, "We sure did." That was Desmond Doss. Still the same man who had knelt to pray in the barracks while his fellow soldiers threw boots at him. Surprised that anyone thought what he had done was remarkable. In 2004, a documentary about his life was released. In 2016, Mel Gibson directed Hacksaw Ridge, a Hollywood film that told his story to a new generation. Andrew Garfield was nominated for an Academy Award for playing him. The real Desmond Doss watched a few minutes of it before he died. He died on March 23, 2006. He was 87 years old. He is buried at the Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee. He went to war with no weapon. He came home having saved more lives than anyone could count. And the men who had thrown boots at him while he prayed, the men who had beaten him, called him a coward, tried to get rid of him, those men spent the rest of their lives saying the same thing Captain Glover said. That he was one of the bravest persons alive. That he had saved them. That they had been wrong about everything.